car upgrade. And here we have RC Screw Stainless Steel Screw Kit, donated by Kojot0976. Thanks again, man. Anyways, this is one of those must-have upgrades for any one of your RCs. The screws on there are just not going to do, and for Kojot, his are starting to rust, so it's a good thing that I got this upgrade now. Now, before I get into this upgrade, I want to go ahead and do something first. As you can see on the receiver box, the paint's starting to chip off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this RC up because it's a bit dirty right now. I'm going to take off these pieces, I'm going to repaint them with some of that orange paint, and then I'm going to use Rust-Oleum's Crystal Clear Enamel. This should give it a nice protective layer, and it's going to give it a nice gloss too. So let's go ahead and get that done with. So while I'm waiting for the paint to dry that I put on the top of the receiver box and gear cover, I'm going to go ahead and replace some of the screws on the chassis right now. So let's talk about the kit. The kit does include a 1.5, 2, and 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench, and you're going to need them because these screws are hex. Now they nearly include every single screw on here except for the elongated grub screw that holds in the top of the drive shaft, the shoulder screws for the top of the shock, and the screws that hold in the body mount. But they do have everything else, including all the nuts. So the first two screws I'm going to go ahead and replace are the ones that are found on the bottom of the receiver box. The receiver box itself is held together with 4 screws, but there's 2 that hold it in. So every time I pull out one of the screws from the RC, I'm going to go ahead and find its matching size in the kit. Some of these screws though are not going to be the same exact size. They may be a little bit longer. If they're too long, I'll just go ahead and file them down. And I'm not going to be throwing away the stock screws because I'm sure I'm going to find a use for them sometime in the future. Now it's time to move on to the Nerf bars. Each one has 4 screws. I'm going to be replacing all 4 of them for each side, and I'm going to be replacing this one that holds the wire tie down. Now it's time to move on to the ESC. Now with mine, I'm only going to have 1 screw on one side, but if you have the Millennium ESC, you're going to have a screw on each side. Once you're done with the ESC, you're going to flip the RC upside down, and you're going to take care of the 4 that hold down the battery tie downs. Now I'm going to flip back over, and I'm going to work on the transmission now. There's 4 screws that hold it in. One there, there, and here. I'm also going to be removing this screw and this nut that hold the motor mount plate to the transmission. So there's a few things I should point out. You can replace that 3mm nut that's in there, but you cannot replace that shoulder screw that the motor mount plate sits on. On this, you're going to replace the screws that hold the motor mount plate to the motor and the grub screw that holds the pinion gear on. With the transmission taken care of, it's time to move on to these 2 screws that hold on the top body mount. So I checked up on the gear cover and the waterproof receiver box, and the paint is still drying, so I might as well go ahead and just finish off the rest of the RC. I'm going to start off with the front assembly. It's held in with 4 screws, 2 right here, 1 there, and then the other one right there. Before I can pull off the front, I need to go ahead and flip it upside down, and I need to remove this screw. Alright, now that I got the front off, I need to go ahead and remove both of the tires. The next thing I need to do is take off the front bumper, and it's held in with 5 screws, 2 up top and 3 on bottom. I'm going to pull out the bumper, and now it's time to point out all the screws I need to replace. I have 3 on the bottom front, 1 for each shock and 1 in the middle. For the shock tower there's 4. For the camber links there's 1 on each side. For the turnbuckles there's 1 on each side. For these 2 that hold in the axle carrier, well, those are shoulder screws, so I don't have to worry about them. But I do have to replace these 2 that hold in the steering bell cranks. On this, all I have to replace are these 2 that hold in the foam bumper. With that taken care of, I can slide the bumper back on, install the 2 screws on top, the 3 on bottom, and replace these 2 as well. Before I slide this back on, I need to go ahead and replace these screws on the servo, 4 that hold it in and these 2 on the arms. Now that I got the front back in, I'm going to reattach the tires and then move on to the back. The back is held in with 4 screws. We have 2 on top and then 2 on bottom. Now that I got the back off, it's time to start replacing some screws. I got 1 at the bottom of each shock. On this side, I have to replace all 4 that hold in the shock tower, 1 at each end of the camber link, 2 that hold in the rear bumper, 1 in the center back, 4 on the bottom, and then finally 2 on the rear bumper. Before I reattach the rear assembly, I need to pull out the spur gear. There we go. Now I have to replace the 3 screws that hold on the spur gear to the slipper pad. I need to go ahead and replace this grub screw and this nut. Now that I'm done with the rear assembly, it's time to finally go ahead and reattach the gear cover and the top of the receiver box. With the receiver box back together, as well as the gear cover back on, I am finished with this process. It was a long, painstaking thing to do, but believe me guys, it was well worth it. And as always, RC screws are easy with plenty of extras, and a case you can do whatever you want to with. As for all the stock screws, majority of these I'm going to be throwing away because they're rusted, but the ones that aren't rusted I'm going to go ahead and hold on to because I know I'm going to find a use for them in the future. Other than that, I am done. Thank you again, Kojot, for this awesome donation. And that was Kojot's level 4 upgrade.